Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. Well, following decades of expansion, the EU is set to get smaller. UK Prime Minister Theresa May has triggered Article 50, thus setting in motion the withdrawal of the UK from the bloc. And while there are countries who want in, appetite for new membership appears low. Membership talks did officially open with 5 countries in the Western Balkans, a region where tension is now thought to be rising, and according to EU eyes, Russian influence could be on the increase. In a recent summit, the European heads of state wanted to underline their unwavering support to the region in their quest to join the EU. But how are those words being heard? Well, I'm joined in studio by Albania's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Ditmir Bushati. You're with the ruling Socialist Democrat Party. Mr. Bushati, thanks for your time. Tell me, first of all, Albania is one of the countries that would like to start these accession talks with the EU. However, doesn't seem to be going anywhere. How do you feel the EU looks towards Albania today?
Last November, European Commission published the annual report on Albania, and it came up with the recommendation for the start of accession talks, with the understanding that Albania will implement justice reform, and particularly the so-called vetting law, according to which all judges and prosecutors in my country will go through a screening process. This is an encouraging news for Albania, and it goes also as a consequence of deep reforms we have undertaken, particularly in the area of rule of law and justice reform, in the fight against organized crime and corruption. And we are looking forward to sit around accession table, because in the case of Albania, and I think this holds true also for other Western Balkan countries, EU accession process is seen as an incentive to develop our economy, to transform our society, and to modernize the way how institutions are working in the country.
Now, you mentioned there the judicial reform. Indeed, the EU as a bloc is saying that has to be put in place before they'll start those accession talks. But within Albania, they seem to be causing controversy. The opposition party fears that these judicial reforms is really giving control of the judiciary to the government. Is that causing divisions within Albania? It seems from the outside that you're having that pro-EU bloc and the government, and now an opposition that's becoming increasingly less pro-EU.
Indeed, this is an unprecedented reform because it is deep, it is quite comprehensive, it is bringing a new architecture for the whole justice system.
So all judges and prosecutors would be screened.
All judges and prosecutors will be screened. So there will be a screening. There will be a screening process for their professional and moral integrity, and also their wealth will be screened. From the very beginning, from the very outset, we have insisted as a ruling majority to involve as much as possible international expertise into this process. So there will be a committee of vetters elected by Albanian parliament on parity.
Albanian vetters or a mix
Albanian
of...
vetters that will be strongly backed by international experts.
And the EU believes that in the region and in Albania, the Russian influence is growing. And it does look like the opposition party also supports the Russian side of things. Is that then a problem, having EU-US influences in major reforms? Where does Albania sit? It looks definitely like you have a split between the pro-EU Albania and the less pro, the more wanting also to have a Russian influence in the country.
I don't think that we are facing a split in the country as far as the direction of the country. There is a political resistance coming from segments of political life in Albania, as well as coming from segments of judiciary that prefer the status quo. So I would not connect automatically this with the influences of the so-called third actors. But our government, our ruling majority, is determined to move towards the EU direction with the reform process, because in our case, EU accession process is very much connected with the quality of the reform process. And by implementing judicial reform, would be in a very good position when we sit around accession tables.
Okay, interesting. So that's for Albania's part. And about the wider region, just for a minute, and we'll go back to Albania afterwards. But Macedonia, in some ways, is nearly being seen as this tug-of-war between the West and Russia. There was, elections there, and the EU definitely wants the president to allow Macedonian ethnic and an Albanian ethnic coalition form the next government as they won the elections. 25%, I believe, of Macedonia is still ethnic Albanians. But again, a lot of people are worried that this is the EU trying to have control in the region where they really shouldn't be sticking their nose in too far. How do you see it?
I think it's a question of rule of law, respect for the will of voters, and the respect for the majority in the parliament. It is a democracy crisis, although we have seen some backtracking in the past in different Western Balkan countries. Still, EU accession process is seen as the most popular game in town because of the instruments that are at the disposal of European Union. It is quite unfortunate to see political leaders in our friendly neighboring Macedonia to play these games also with influences of other actors. But as we closely cooperate with Macedonia within different regional forums, we hope and we wish Macedonian authorities will find a common ground to overcome differences, and we hope that the new institutions will be duly established.
Because there seems to be kind of tensions and fears even that, Albania could still be looking for a greater Albania, with that 25% of ethnic Albanians in Macedonia.
We are a NATO member state, and we are also a candidate member for joining European Union. Albania traditionally has been seen in the region as a pole of stability. And we will continue to resonate as much as we can and to project as much as we can democratic stability in our neighborhood.
You mentioned their reform, and we looked at the judicial reforms, but there's also, a lot of the EU also says Albania isn't doing enough to stamp out corruption. In one area in particular, the cannabis growing, I believe, is the EU's biggest outdoor grower of marijuana. And a lot of farmers are saying, well, they simply pay the police to look the other way because they're struggling farmers. They need the income. What is the government doing to try and crack down on other forms of corruption and indeed this cannabis trade?
This is the first government after the fall of communist regime that has confronted these phenomenon. First, by recognizing the phenomenon. Second, by eradicating from the map of cannabis, if I may use this terminology, parts of Albania that were not under the state control before we swept into office in 2013. And then now we are working also on a preventive strategy, because we realized that it's not sufficient to have only police forces and security forces on the ground, because you need also to discourage the phenomenon, and you need to bring on board also local community leaders, and we need to fight in a more decisive manner also corruption and all sorts of crime related to these phenomena. And now we are working also with other agencies, because as the figures are showing, this is not an Albanian phenomenon per se. It is a regional phenomenon. There is a network that is encouraging these phenomena, and we believe that by the end of this year we will have remarkable results on the ground.
Because it's not an easy challenge, I imagine, in a poor country.
And you need also to engage into this process, as I mentioned, local community leaders, civil society activists, and you need to have a society that is fully on board.
Now, of course, Albania on the West Balkans wasn't quite as affected by the refugee crisis seen, on the other side of that Balkans route. You did keep your doors open, I believe, to refugees, most of them wanting to pass through. But how do you feel, the EU is handling that today? Is Albania willing to, take refugees that arrive in? Is the EU failing?
We're part of all initiatives in this respect. Of course, the closure of the Balkan route saved somehow our countries. But let me be clear on these phenomenon. We have seen Western Balkan countries cooperating in a rather satisfactory manner. And also we have seen the reaction coming from Western Balkan countries to these crises, in some cases much more mature and more European value-based than some EU member states. And also from the security standpoint, Western Balkans proved to be a security provider for the entire European security architecture. In the last 2 years, the level of interaction between Western Balkans on one hand and European Union on the other hand has been very good on these subjects, and I hope and I wish now we can upgrade our relationship and we can build a compelling narrative, because when we speak about the phenomenon, but also about the relationship between European Union and Western Balkans, we cannot have a relationship that it's quite similar with that of a crisis management mode. So we need to go beyond that.
Yeah, given that you're between Greece and the rest of us. But there is also the phenomenon, if you like, of Albanians leaving Albania. I believe in 2015 in Germany, the second highest number of people applying for asylum were actually Albanians, over 50,000 people.
That's true, but now we are in 2017. 2014 it has been Serbia, then Macedonia and Kosovo that were mostly affected by these phenomenon. In 2015 also Albania. As you probably know, this triggered the actions from German government and then European Union later on to transfer Western Balkan countries in the list of safe countries of origin. So we have also taken some measures on the ground.
Why do people want to leave so much?
There are people leaving from Western Balkans. There are people leaving from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, from Southern Europe to Northern Europe. If one refers to figures provided by Eurostat and also interior ministries in key European capitals, you will see this trend. Because people believe that they do have better opportunities by going in the northern part of Europe. As we all know, refugees coming from Syria and from other countries, they were aiming to go either in Germany or in Northern Europe. So there were very few who wanted to stay in Southern Europe or in Western Balkans. But on the other hand, the cooperation at the police level and security forces is quite good, and we are...
People are coming back from Germany, just very briefly?
Yes, okay. And we are aiming to strengthen these cooperation.
Okay. And very, very finally, because we're almost out of time, Mr. Bushati, but when you look at the EU today, with that refugee crisis, even the Eurozone countries economically, it's starting to get better, but still not out of dire straits. Do you still, how do you see the future as the EU as a bloc? Do you think it's a solid one? Is it going to stay together?
First, I believe we need to consolidate European project. And when we speak about Western Balkans, about 6 countries in the Western Balkans, we need to have in mind exactly these consolidation project. We need to finalize these process, because Western Balkans is an unfinished business. This is second. Second, I think it's mutually beneficial, what I'm saying. It is beneficial, of course, for Western Balkan countries. We are European and we would like to be members of European Union, and we see this journey as a transformative one. But it is also in the interest of European Union to spread the influence, the leverage, the democratic influence, values in the entire European territory. Thirdly, we need a little bit more gestures coupled with instruments. I remember 10 years ago when European Union was celebrating 50th anniversary, all Western Balkan countries were sitting around the table. It is unfortunate to note that last week candidate countries or Western Balkan countries were not invited, because these are some signs of a clear perspective for these
future of the bloc, indeed.
The future of the bloc, and also for the future of Western Balkans.
Mr. Bushati, thanks so much for your time speaking to us here on France 24. Mr. Bushati, Foreign Affairs Minister for Albania. That brings us to the end of